Corvus Corax, the Ravenlord, also known as the Deliverer, came to awareness in a lightless chamber far beneath the surface of a barren moon called Lycaeus, a slave prison satellite ruled over by the tech guilds of Kayavar, where notions of justice and human dignity had no place in the brutal regime. Corax swore to the people of his newfound world he would liberate them from their cruel existence. Fighting for the freedom of the slaves of Lycaeus against the guilds, Corax learned the skill of subterfuge, swiftness, and covert warfare he would impart upon his legion. Upon victory, he renamed his world Deliverance. In his formative years, the ivory-skinned, shadow-eyed, and sable-haired Primarch became a paragon for the virtues of the oppressed, a trait that would stand him apart from the arrogance and cruelty of many of his brothers. The Ravenlord frequently operated alone, or otherwise led small bands of hand-picked warriors who, of all his sons, possessed skills comparable to his own, the Mordaithon or Shadow Masters. This predilection was derived from his time as a freedom fighter, where circumstances dictated small cells of rebels were often more effective than large numbers. It was not unusual for Corax to conduct extensive reconnaissance prior to battle, while most Primarchs would leave such tasks to their warriors. Corax is also known to have led small forces on deep infiltrations far behind enemy lines, striking directly at the heart of an enemy force, leaving his line officers to conduct the overall operation. Frequently, the actions of the main force were in fact a ploy to draw the enemy's attentions from the Primarch's own mission, allowing him to strike the final blow and win the battle. Hello guys, welcome back to Terra, welcome back to Lormus, where today we're going to talk about Corvus Corax in the Raven Guard, and I wanted to do something on all of the legions at some point over the Christmas period, and I thought what to do about the Raven Guard, but of course talk about their newest lore from the drop site Massacre, revisiting perhaps the most catastrophic event in their history. This is the event that pretty much defined the Raven Guard Legion, and as well as the Salamanders, as well as the Iron Hands, and it is one of the greatest betrayals in the entire setting of Warhammer 40k. If you are completely unfamiliar, the drop site Massacre happened on a planet called Istvan V. It was a trap orchestrated by Horus, and early into the heresy, it had been discovered at the very least that Horus had turned against the Emperor of Mankind, and Angron, Fulgrim, and Mortarion were working with him. So the Emperor sent 7 full Space Marine legions to quell this rebellion, and instead it turned out to be a massive trap, because the initial wave of legions, which was comprised of the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard, they assaulted the positions on Istvan V at a place called the Urgul Depression, but upon attempting to fall back to their landing zones and regroup, when the second wave arrived, the other 4 legions, the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the Word Bearers, and the Alpha Legion, all turned out to have secretly sworn in with Horus. None could have seen this coming, unless of course you paid attention to any of those legions at any point during the Great Crusade. However, this was the hammer blow that dealt a significant loss to the Loyalists. The forces of Corvus, Ferrus Manus, and the other one, Vulkan, were caught between Horus's entrenched forces and this second wave, and so it was just an absolute brutal massacre. It was during this battle that Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, was slain. As far as we don't really know what happened to the 2nd and 11th, the first Primarch to ever die. Vulkan was lost during the battle and presumed dead. We later find out he was kidnapped by Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, and Corvus Corax himself barely escaped alive with a fraction of his legion. Before Istvan, he had 80,000 Space Marines. After Istvan, he was down to 3,000, and this just leads to tragedy after tragedy, as throughout the rest of the Horus Heresy, a big part of Corvus's story is him basically trying to regrow his legion as quickly as possible, and that just leads to more and more catastrophe. This is pretty much the defining moment within the Loyalists and their kind of crumbling attempt to quash the heresy quickly. So it's a very important part of Warhammer 40k lore, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the Dropsite Massacre book, a book that came out a few months ago now, and it's a really good novel. It was basically released to go alongside the new edition of Horus Heresy, but it was actually pretty interesting. As I say, this is old Warhammer 40k lore, so a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today we did already know through various novels, and of course in like the background Horus Heresy books, which had given us a lot of details on how the actual battle played out. But we still get some cool new details, and in particular, Corvus Corax is a bit of a badass in this story. So he finds out that Horus has betrayed the Emperor, and he takes it on, you know, pretty well. So an interesting thing about Corvus is that he, of pretty much all of the loyalist Primarchs, already had a problem with Horus. They never got along very well because, as we saw earlier, Horus basically used the Raven Guard, or the early Raven Guard, as his own legion for a while. Corvus hated that. And in addition to that, the early Raven Guard were you know, they had a lot of the practices that Corvus abhorred because he's fundamentally a freedom fighter, right? And so he hated that so many within his legion were actually kind of brutalistic warriors. And in addition to that, Horus had treated the Raven Guard as basically disposable, and Corvus Corax had never forgiven him for this, and so he'd never really trusted Horus. But upon finding out that Horus has betrayed the Emperor of Mankind, he's one of the Primarchs that I think handles it pretty well. He doesn't threaten anybody, he doesn't attack anybody, and in fact he decides to very quickly tell everybody within his legion, within the fleet, the details of this betrayal. And he says, tell them everything, they will need to know. He doesn't try to keep anything secret. Then of course, when Corvus Corax arrives within the system, he enters the War Council with his brothers, Ferrus Manus and Vulkan, as they wait, of course, for the second wave to approach. And it's in this scene that we actually get to see Corvus Corax show a lot more restraint than some of his brothers. So where Ferrus Manus has recently found out about Fulgrim's betrayal and wants to, you know, basically run headlong in and try and bring Fulgrim to justice as quickly as possible, Corvus Corax says, should we do this? Should we end the Brotherhood with murder and leave the future the child of Massacre? And as you can imagine, his brothers don't take too kindly to this. There can be no forgiveness, no restraint. And Corvus Corax, despite the fact he kind of has never really liked Horus, he also is the one that says, well, at the end of the day, you know, a few months ago, these were our brothers. Do we really want to go and kill them? As the Dropsite Massacre actually begins, we get to see Corvus being an absolute madman. So firstly, he conducts just this kind of impossible combat drop. The gunship cuts its engines and nosedives towards the planet like a dagger, and then while the ship plummets towards the void shields of the traitor fortress, Corax and his guard jump into freefall just 50 meters above the shield dome, unfolding their wings, and at the last second they fire their jetpacks and land on the parapets. And this maneuver is said to be so precise and dangerous that even the Astartes would consider it just a suicide mission, a path to disaster. But for Corvus Corax, this is simply just another day doing what he does best. Then, as the combat unfolds, of course, Corvus Corax is a Primarch and substantially outmatches all of the traitor Space Marines. He is described by one of the Horus, Sons of Horus legionaries as Death on Silver Wings. He is just this primordial force rolling across the battlefield, chucking Space Marines aside as he needs. Corvus Corax quite famously has one of the most interesting Primarch abilities where he can basically turn invisible. And it's said that he can turn invisible pretty much to the naked eye. He can make himself appear as if he's invisible. Automatic scanners and that kind of thing can potentially pick him up, but when he wants to slaughter, he does just slaughter. But in this battle, he is just ripping through traitor Space Marines at will, and it's a good time if you're a Raven Guard fan. Then we get some cool kind of classic Raven Guard fighting as they kind of fight in these tunnels. In particular, they're fighting against the Sons of Horus, led by Little Horus Aximand, who is one of the Mournival, one of the most well-known commanders within the Traitor Legion. Corax is, of course, the force that turns the tide against the traitors. He is, you know, well adapted to tunnel fighting due to his upbringing on the planet of Lysaeus, later Deliverance, the Moon, sorry, and it's the fact that he's fighting in this circumstances, he's just in his element, and he is just absolutely cracking through traitors at will. It's a lot of fun. After this point, traces reveal themselves. Corvus Corax really wants to get to Lorgar, and he fights his way through the word bearers, and as he goes, he actually fights against the Galvorbak, who were some of the first possessed in Warhammer 40k. We see their story in the book First Heretic, and he is just fighting through them. Again, they're not really much of a threat to him, but Corvus Corax kind of just is absolutely crushing through to them, and we see his battle against Lorgar. Corvus Corax is really a much better fighter than Lorgar is. There's really no comparison in their kind of combat abilities, and Corvus declares that he's going to be the one to kill Lorgar. He does impale him with his blades, and it is only thanks to the intervention of Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, that Lorgar survives, because he blocks Corvus's killing blow with his blades. Corvus Corax is basically the only Primarch, weirdly, that Conrad Kurz actually hates, and so Conrad Kurz very much wants to have this battle, but Corvus flies off. The reason Kurz actually hates Corvus Corax is because whereas Conrad Kurz is the Night Haunter, he's someone that specializes in stealth, because Corvus Corax has this ability to like literally turn invisible. It's kind of like that moment in Batman where, yes, Conrad Kurz owns the Night, but the Night really belongs to Corvus Corax, because he has an ability that Kurz can just never truly match. After this point, we get into the escape of the loyalists from the battle, and it is of course brutal. Corax fights a fighting retreat, trying to save as many of his sons as possible. Eventually they are rescued by Commander Bran, who disobeyed orders to remain on deliverance because he wanted to come and save his Primarch. And as I say, at this point in the book, the Raven Guard are down to 3,000 warriors when they originally had 80,000. So the Raven Guard are basically done. But it's a really cool book. We also get to see some really kind of fun moments, like Corvus Corax. He actually pilots a gunship in the Istvan 5 Drop Site Massacre. Overall, it's a relatively short book, I think, but it was a lot of fun, and it's sort of a weird one to read because it leaves out a lot of the fun stuff. Like, it doesn't dive, of course, too much into Lorgar versus Corvus, which is pretty much the decisive moment of Corvus's story on Istvan 5. I sometimes find it odd reading these kinds of books, because if they're just going to repeat details from the Horus Heresy, I would just have them paste in chapters from previous books where relevant, just in case it's going to be the case that somebody buys this book as their first Horus Heresy novel, which I think a lot of them will do. So really enjoyed them revisiting the Drop Site Massacre, and there are definitely a lot of things like this in the Heresy where there's still stuff for them to cover. There's still really cool things for us to dive into, and lots of details from the Heresy that we don't know. Just seeing their reactions of how the loyalists felt when they were betrayed, even things like that we actually don't get a lot of because they're covered very briefly in the Heresy. So hello chat, how are you doing tonight? What exactly did he see when he saw the Emperor, really? And between them and the Alpha Legion, who do you think would be in a kitchen cabinet right now? In the kitchen cabinet, definitely the Alpha Legion. Like, as we talked about last week with Josh, there is this storyline in the Heresy where you have these Alpha Legion that are stuck underground, like in the concrete of the Imperial Palace. So the idea that you open a cabinet and there's just an Alpha Legionnaire there kind of makes sense to me. So yeah, I'm actually alright with that. But in terms of what did the Emperor see, that's a great question. Corvus does appear to actually glimpse like the real Emperor, as it were, for a second, and so he basically is the one who's able to see what the Emperor truly looks like. Corax felt a hand on his arm and straightened up under the Emperor's guidance. His father appeared less majestic, the light dimming beneath his skin, his face taking on the features of a normal man with brown eyes, while long dark hair flowed from his scalp. "Is this your true face?" asked Corax. "I have no such thing," replied the Emperor. "I have worn 1,000,000 faces over the millennia, according to need or whim." So there we go. Corax almost got Lorgar. He did almost get Lorgar, and he's pretty determined, I think, to be the one to take Lorgar out. So we will see. But I think Guilliman's also going to want to beat him to the punch. Conrad didn't even have the decency to kill his own sons that he so claimed had to die. Corvus hugged each of his sons before putting them down with mercy. Yes, definitely one of the most heartbreaking moments in the Heresy at the end of the book Corax, which is one of the anthologies. We actually get to see Corvus kill his sons that have been mutilated such by the actions of the Alpha Legion, and in that probably one of my favorite passages to read. I remember everything, and I remember my exact words before I sent that fiend back into the warp vortex that had birthed it. I promised him that I would destroy every warp-spawned, chaos-tainted creature in the galaxy before I die, and I have always kept my promises, my son. And this is right before Corvus Corax euthanizes, I think, 2,000 of his sons, right, in that scene specifically. So it's pretty brutal, and it's after that point, of course, that Corvus will, go into the tower and deliverance, and then eventually say nevermore and fly off, and basically commit himself to just slaughtering traitors for the rest of his life. Which, I mean, as decisions go, isn't that bad? Corax right now is ridiculously OP now. He wiped out Demon Primarch Lorgar powered by all 4 Chaos Gods, right? I mean, it's a pretty fair assumption. The truth is we don't really know. Like, it's not like they use very exact language when they talk about this. I will say, and I think I've talked about this before, the book is actually, despite the misinformation, the book is actually pretty clear that Corvus isn't a demon. Like, it does say very specifically that he's not a demon, which is always amazing because, like, every YouTube video and every Reddit post says Corvus Corax is now a demon, but I don't know why they do that. Like, it's actually quite direct. It's one of the few things they're direct about. But hey ho. I think Corax is what Primarchs are in essence. Yeah, that's basically right. He just says that he's what they always were. I feel like the Raven Guard and Corax are such a missed opportunity for GW. There are so many good stories and motivations that come from them. I think it's definitely true to say they haven't known what to do with the Raven Guard for a long time. If you're not familiar, in like 40k, the Raven Guard's probably most like detailed story is against the Tau, where they're teaming up with the White Scars. And they, of course, have a bit of a rivalry with the White Scars there, and in particular, Cavian Shrike and Kusaro Khan have a rivalry, and they actually end up kind of teaming up against Shadow Sun, but they actually don't appear too often in 40k. I don't know what I don't even know what the most well-known Raven Guard story is from 40k, but I don't necessarily know that would make me that upset as a Raven Guard fan, because it also means that they're largely kind of a blank slate. Do you know what I mean? And so there's a lot you can do with them. They've got a new chapter master now. They're supposed to be bringing back like the Mordython and these kind of Legion, the cooler parts of the Horus Heresy lore for the Raven Guard are going to come back. So that's pretty fun. And so, yeah, there's a lot to do with them, but I do get what you mean. I just don't really know. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'd be quite excited. Like, they are just a blank slate. They can do whatever they want with them now. Knowing what Corvus is now, what do you think Chagatai Khan will turn out to be? We vaguely know about his early Primarch power, but nothing about what it's become. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether he's still got kind of super Alak Ges speed when he comes back as an older man. In the Ashes of the Imperium book, we see him kind of barely able to stand, because he's just died. And so he's really dealing with the ramifications from that. I hope that he is one of the Primarchs that develops some sort of psychic ability. I think that makes the most sense. Seeing Chagatai Khan with a ridiculous amount of storm magic and just able to do kind of everything the White Scars Storm Seers can do, but to an absurd degree, would just be amazing. I really like the idea because if you've ever seen the White Scars, you know that they have to have like eagles and falcons on their arms. I like the idea that because all of the Primarchs are getting a piece of weaponry from the Emperor's armor, or armor from the Emperor's armor. I like the idea that the eagle that lives on the Emperor's arm, the Emperor's shoulder, I like the idea that turns into an actual eagle that Chagatai Khan can control. That's my plan, and I hope they do it. I think it's just too cool. But yeah, so I imagine he'll just be a psyker, but the exact extent of his abilities, who knows? I mean, we still don't really know why he disappeared. Perhaps he has developed some sort of relationship with the Harlequins, or it's just something crazy, and then they could do all kinds of stuff. Corvus Corax got his name mentioned once in Ashes. That's true, yes. So Corvus Corax is notably missing from Ashes of the Imperium, which is weird because at the end of the Heresy, Corvus Corax is basically with the Lion and Leman Russ, because this is one of the weird things Warhammer 40k lore. This lore was properly written about, I think, in one of the White Dwarf magazines, and they basically detail how Leman Russ and Lorgar and Corvus Corax, so they do meet in the Corax novel, and then they meet up with the Lion, and then they go like purging systems, and then purging the traitor homeworlds, and we kind of know the consequences of that by now. But for some reason, when the Lion and Leman Russ head to Terra, Corvus isn't with them. And so where is Corvus Corax right now in the Scouring is a pretty interesting question. And in terms of the Ravengard being a missed opportunity, I do think there's something here. I do think there's something in the writers are doing something with Corvus Corax for the Scouring, and that's pretty exciting to see. Of course, we know how it ends. We know he's going to head off into the Eye of Terror, but there's a decent amount of time that we've got until that point, so perhaps Corvus Corax has got something planned. Sharakin is also still about. It was worth mentioning. Sharakin, one of the most popular characters from the Heresy, but one of the best fighters in the Imperium, and he has gone into his stasis, Susan Membrane stasis, and so he'll be back at some point, most likely in the Scouring, but perhaps even in 40k or something completely nuts. With Corax unlocking his full potential, do you think he can have insane psycho powers? For example, he could point his hand at people and they literally sink into shadows. I don't know if they make him that OP, but like he is pretty OP. He's incredibly OP in the Eye of Terror. Like he is just a storm of ravens and darkness, and he literally just rips through word bearers and they stand no chance. And even the word bearers in the story are scared of Corvus Corax. He's like they don't know what he is at first. He's just like a mystical force that's just ripping word bearers apart. So they know how powerful he has become, but whether he will keep that power outside of the Eye of Terror, because the Eye of Terror, when he's in the Eye of Terror, it's kind of similar to being in the warp, right? Because the Eye of Terror is where the warp overlays with reality, and so the fact that he is able to just kind of rip the word bearers apart very quickly is a testament to his incredible power within the Eye of Terror. But just as we see the Emperor be more powerful in the City of Dust, I wouldn't expect Corvus Corax to have all of those abilities outside of the Eye of Terror, but I'd love to be wrong about that. And I think it's entirely possible that he will come out and he will be by far the strongest Psyker Primarch out of the Imperials, and at the very least, he's one of the only Loyalist Primarchs who properly understands what they are. And his story after the Dropsite Massacre is largely him trying to rebuild his Legion, but in this process, he starts to discover more about what the Primarchs are and the idea of the Emperor kind of stealing the fire of the Chaos Gods and putting that within them. But yeah, I think that you need more than another Psycho Primarch. I talked about this before. One of the biggest problems kind of narratively for the writers is Magnus, because it's very hard to write Magnus confrontations satisfyingly because of the fact that Magnus is just too powerful. He's just too powerful to fight in the setting. So you have to pull out some like gotcha where you just say, oh, well, Guilliman's got the Sisters of Silence with him, or you're going to say that the Emperor kind of intervenes to help the Lion, or whatever it's going to be. You're always going to have something to defeat Magnus, kind of this kind of gotcha that the Loyalists can pull out of the bag. But the truth is, it would be much more interesting if you had like Psyker Primarchs who could genuinely do meaningful battle against Magnus and keep it more entertaining, I think. Even like Vulkan's battle versus Magnus in the what's it called, book, Echoes of what's it called, Echoes of the Imperium, what am I thinking of? Book 7, Siege of Terror. Echoes of Eternity. Yeah, that's right. I knew it was the word echoes. I kept thinking Echoes of the Imperium. In Echoes of the Eternity, it's sort of I don't know how other people felt about it, but it wasn't great. I don't know about you guys. Like, it was one of those things where so Magnus can basically just keep killing Vulkan, and then Vulkan keeps coming back, and so there's a point where Magnus can just set every cell in Vulkan's body alight. Sorry, Fury of Magnus. It also covers this as well. It's the same event, but it's in Fury of Magnus, Vulkan does quote unquote kind of win the fight, but really it's in Echoes of Eternity that it continues. And so in Echoes of Eternity, Vulkan has every cell of his body kind of set alight. Magnus can do whatever he wants to him because he's so psychically powerful. But then yeah, eventually Vulkan just gets there and can send him back to the warp. So it's a bit of a weird scene. I don't know. I didn't love it, but it's the problem. The problem is Magnus. The problem is Magnus is too powerful as a character. Do you think Vulkan will have an ability other than being a perpetual, and do you think he still has that? It's a great question. There's no reason he can't, and maybe they will do. But to be honest, with Vulkan, they don't need to so much as the other Primarchs. With the Lion, for example, if the Lion didn't have his forest walking ability, he wouldn't be as interesting as he is right now, because the Lion in the Heresy is just an incredible fighter and strategist. But Vulkan is the ultimate artisan of the Loyalists. He is the person who is going to be able to, you know, fix the Golden Throne, if they're going to be able to fix the Golden Throne, or he is going to be the person to create new weaponry that would be able to, you know, destroy Magnus the Red from range. He's already got enough. There's so much you can do with that aspect of Vulkan that none of the other Loyalists really infringe on. Out of the Loyalist side, you know, you've got Ferrus Manus, who was an incredible craftsman, but he's dead, and then you've got Rogel Dawn, but Rogel Dawn is more of a strategist, and he is the Praetorian. So his thing isn't so much about crafting like Vulkan is, whereas Vulkan's ability to craft is said to be so powerful that, like, there's a quote, it is from Vulkan, so he is biased, but he does say, I think, that any of his creations on their own could have turned the tide of the heresy into Horus's favor. That's how powerful his weapons are, which is why he has to destroy so many of them. And so it's, yeah, like the return of Vulkan to the Imperium would be massive in that respect. I mean, Vulkan crafts a weapon without really thinking about it that can permanently kill demons, like the Talisman of Seven Hammers. And so the fact that when he returns, I mean, there's no limit on what Vulkan could accomplish. So in that respect, from the lore that we have so far, I would say Vulkan's return is definitely the most important. Once Vulkan returns, things are really, I mean, there's so much you can do with Vulkan. The book clarified Magnus disassembled Vulkan's perpetualism, and he just respawned anyway because the Emperor made Vulkan into something bigger than a perpetual. The book is very much anti-Magnus. I think that ADB had a bone to pick with Magnus in that story. Maybe ADB has always had something against Magnus because he also kind of shits on him a little bit in the Black Legion series, which, hey, this is right. But I don't know. We'll see. Element of Flight, like, thank you so much for the gift memberships. Please thank Element if you got one, and jump into Discord as well if you want to talk 40k. And don't forget to join the incredible member Discord. Yes, thank you, Element. Yeah, it's a great point. Where if you got any 40k questions, anything I didn't get to in the stream, you can at me in there, and I will get back to them. Christian's also in there as well, and he is always willing to answer people's questions if you have anything about the lore. Read the lore for the new Aethon. That's the new chapter master, right? So I don't think he has a book, does he? Unless I completely missed that. Okay, he's got a Warhammer community article, and he's mentioned in a White Dwarf. Well, that is, to be fair, that's actually quite nice. Only recently elevated to the position of chapter master, Aethon Shan exemplifies the solemn, taciturn nature of the Raven Guard, said to be able to reach any prey no matter how secure. He orchestrates his chapter's campaigns from the shadows, emerging from the darkness only at the most opportune moments to land the killing blow upon the enemy. New though he may be to his position, Shan has centuries of combat experience behind him. He had already captained the 10th, 8th, 4th and 1st companies before being elevated as a Master of Shadows. Shan has demonstrated a masterful grasp of grand strategy and truly exemplifies his chapter's measured and precise approach to warfare. Just as Shrike and Severax did before him, he applies the Raven Guard's strength sparingly but to great effect. He guides his autonomous strike forces to clandestine campaigns across the Imperium. His shadow captains are trusted to wage campaigns of misdirection, assassination, subterfuge and terror that leave the enemies of the Raven Guard off balance and primed for destruction. So too does he know the value of information, maintaining networks of spies, info thralls, and other agents to keep him appraising of rising threats and weaknesses. Shan's appointment as Master of Shadows came after his predecessor, Cavian Shrike, ordered a scattering of the chapter's strike forces. Having been elected to command in the aftermath of Corvin Severax's death, Cavian Shrike had come to realize that the mantle of high command did not fit well upon his shoulders. He saw himself in the same recklessness and lust for battle that had condemned Severax to his death. Moreover, he had invested himself deeply in mastering the Path of Ambush, a master of shadows he believed should be an exemplar of all three elements of the Primarch's trifold Path of Shadow. Despite his misgivings, Shrike led the chapter master well in the time of great horror and steered his battle brothers through the conflicts that followed the opening of the Great Rift, almost from the moment of his promotion. However, Shrike decided that he would eventually abdicate his position as soon as an appropriate successor could be identified. The Indomitus Crusade provided Shrike with the opportunity he sought. The greatest of his commanders were scattered among these warfleets and elsewhere, there to be elevated and analysed by their commander. Of all the battle brothers unwittingly observed and evaluated by the incumbent Master of Shadows, Shan demonstrated the greatest talent for decisive leadership and the marshalling of meagre resources. As well as a restraint that Cavian Shrike believed himself to lack, his victories over the Genestealer cults on Gelvia, the Iron Warriors in the Strignum system, and the invading Orcs at Askian II had been won with minimal loss and maximum effect upon the enemy. Summoned back to the Ravenspire in the aftermath of these victories, Athan Shan was swiftly and without ceremony elevated to Master of Shadows. There he donned the relic jetpack, Blackwing mantle, and took up the Claws of Severax, artifacts once borne by the fallen chapter master and subsequently recovered by Cavian Shrike. On the rare occasion that Shan commits his blades to the fight, his presence heralds doom for the enemy. Ordinarily, he arrives at the culmination of his battle brothers' clandestine efforts, descending to land the killing blow upon an already weakened foe. He is a shadowy avatar of vengeance, tongues of black flame licking from the nacelles of the Blackwing mantle as he plummets into his enemies to slash and rake with his pair of lightning claws. The towers of the Ravenspire are the roosts of many strange avian beasts. Upon such close inspection does it become apparent that many of these creatures are not wholly natural. They range in form from vat-grown organic specimens to those almost entirely mechanical in nature. Athan Shan is always attended by several of these servo automata, and many are said to accompany him to battle, filming hidden perches or soaring unseen overhead. These outsiders and enemies, keen enough to spot them, simply assume they are some form of surveillance mechanism, which is only part of the truth. Certainly they feed Athan Shan and his commanders a constant influx of tactical data and intercepted transmissions, yet to Battle Brothers of the Raven Guard, their constant presence is a reassuring reminder that wherever the chapter wages war, the lost Primarch's gaze remains upon them. It's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's a good reference to the idea that Corvus Corax had sort of a dabbling within genecraft that none of the other Primarchs really did. And so it's not really apparent that every single thing Corvus Corax ever made has been destroyed. And so that's maybe what these little creatures are that follow Athan Shan around. He's definitely a gorgeous model, and massive props to Games Workshop for cracking that one out. And I think it's honestly so exciting that you've got now, you know, multiple character models for all of the first founding chapters. And given how well Space Marines sell, I think it's pretty likely we start getting chapter-specific units for all of the first founding chapters, because I think we need them. I think it would be so cool. I mean, Imperial Fist Breachers, more Dython Snipers. There's just so many awesome things you can do. But it is a really cool introduction. It's one of those things. I try not to, when they introduce a new character, I guess there's a YouTube, you got two options, right? You can cover it straight away. Like Vashdor's a really good example. I have held off making a Vashdor video for a long time because I always suspected Vashdor would be big lore. But like when they originally introduced Vashdor, people were making videos, but we knew so little about Vashdor. They're pretty much all out of date already. So now that we've actually got a decent amount of Vashdor lore, I'm actually able to make a pretty, I think, comprehensive Vashdor video in terms of what his methods are, the way he behaves, what his forces are like. And I think that that's pretty exciting. So with characters like Athan Shan, I guess I'm just sort of waiting to see what they sort of do with him. And then if it's interesting, I'll make a proper video on it. But if people are interested, I guess, maybe I should just do them more for live streams, and I can just do a readout of the new lore as they come. I am always looking to kind of do like quicker, easier live streams, but we'll see. Normally, I just talk about a book that I've recently read, but it's certainly easier to summarize a Warhammer community article than it is to recall the Dropsite Massacre lore from memory. What would you like to see for the Raven Guard? I was talking about this earlier. The thing about the Raven Guard for me is that they're largely an open book because they get such a raw deal in the Heresy. I don't think that we've seen nearly enough of the Raven Guard, really, and they don't get a lot of attention in 40k, as anyone who isn't Ultramarines, Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, or Black Templars does. But we should get way more on them. And they've got a new Chapter Master. They've got plans to rebuild their Legion. Sharakin is out there somewhere. One day he'll return. So I really hope the Raven Guard do get a bunch more focus in this future. But for now, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, take care, everybody, and I will see you on Wednesday.